This is the Practice of Therapy podcast with Gordon Brewer. This is session number 36 of the Practice of Therapy podcast. Hello, folks. I'm your host, Gordon Brewer, and thanks for joining me on the Practice of Therapy podcast. If this is the first time you're listening to the podcast, I'm so glad you found us and so glad you're listening to the podcast. And for those of you that are joining us again, welcome back, and I'm glad you're following us. Wherever you might be listening to the podcast, one thing I would invite you to do is just go over and subscribe to the podcast, or at least give us a rating and let us know what you think of the podcast. And one of the things I was looking at this week, we're just looking at some of the metrics around the podcast. And so far, since I started the podcast back in August of 2017, we've had nearly 5,000 downloads so far, and it's just amazing how fast people are starting to find out about the podcast and are starting to listen to it. So glad you're here. Glad you're part of this journey with me. You know, one of the things I've got coming up this weekend is my daughter is graduating from college. She has finally made it after 4 years of college. She's at Savannah, the University of the South. For those of you that might not know where that is, it's a small liberal arts Episcopal school between Chattanooga and Nashville, Tennessee. And it's quite a place. A lot of times people refer to it as going to Hogwarts because the traditions they have there are just kind of quite interesting for being just tucked away on the Cumberland Plateau in southern Tennessee. It's when you go onto campus, it's kind of like walking onto Cambridge, because a lot of the stuff they had there was kind of modeled after the Cambridge campus, and the students, especially the upperclassmen, all wear their gowns. So it is very much like kind of going to Hogwarts in a way. So, but that's a whole other story. But anyway, I just have to say on the podcast how proud I am of my daughter, and the fact that she's graduating from college, and we're on to the next phase of life in terms of moving into adulthood, which is quite the milestone. But anyway, I doubt that my daughter Rebecca is listening to this, but Rebecca, I love you and I'm very proud of you that you've made those things. So anyway, that's before I get all teared up here. Today's podcast, I've got a friend of mine, Whitney Owens, and one of the things about Whitney is that we met through a mastermind group. She's one of the people that is a mutual journeyman or journey person in the mastermind group I'm involved in with Joe Sanok, and got to meet Whitney back last month up in Michigan when we had Joe's Next Level Living Room, and it was just a very great setting to get together with other people that were at the similar places in their private practice journeys. And one of the things that I'm just absolutely learning along the way, or one of the things that's been great about this podcast, is that I've had the opportunity to be in contact with people that normally I probably would have never met. And so it's, and just also with the networking that I'm doing, that I find myself doing online and in connection with the Practice of Therapy blog and the podcast now, of really running into some fascinating people and learning so much from other people that are on parallel journeys with their private practices. And so that's one of the reasons that I wanted to have started or getting to organizing a mastermind group of my own that connected with the Practice of Therapy, and had several people out there that are interested in joining a mastermind group. And a mastermind group is just simply a way for people that are at similar places in their journey to meet regularly, to just talk about their practices and talk about the business side of things. And sometimes we talk about clinical stuff, but mainly it's focused on kind of building the business side of things. And so the format is that we meet 2 times a month for just 1 hour at a designated time, each month for, every other week. And we meet by Zoom, use that platform so that we can talk to each other through video conferencing. And we each week is 1 or 2 people are on a hot seat. And so we present a question that we have to the group, or maybe something that we're working on or trying to figure out how to do. It might be something as simple as, what phone system should I switch to? Or, I'm having difficulty with finding other counselors to join my practice. Or it might be, I'm looking at my business model and I would like to change the way I'm doing things. But regardless of what it is, what happens is when you present things to a group, they form what is called a mastermind, and that, 2 heads are better than 1, so to speak. And so that's the whole purpose of a mastermind. And so, as I mentioned, I'm getting those started. Trying to get at least 1, maybe 2 going for later in this month. As I'm recording this, it's in May, the first week of May of 2018, if you happen to be listening to this later. But anyway, those are mastermind groups are something that I plan to have ongoing and make those available to people that want to join those. And so to find out more about that, just go over to practiceoftherapy.com/mastermind, and you can find out more about that. So, anyway, so as I mentioned today, I've got Whitney Owens, and Whitney is a therapist, and she has a group practice in Savannah, Georgia. So without further ado, here is Whitney Owens. Well, welcome, folks, to the Practice of Therapy podcast, and I am so happy to have one of my good friends, Whitney Owens, to join me today. Welcome, Whitney.
Thanks, Gordon.
I'm glad you're here. Whitney and I got to know each other at a mastermind group up in Michigan with our friend Joe Sanok, and so I was talking with Whitney during our gathering in his Next Level living room, and I really knew that I needed to interview Whitney for a podcast. So, Whitney, I'm glad you're here.
Well, I'm glad to be here.
Yeah. So let me tell you all a little bit about Whitney, because she's a person you need to get to know. So Whitney is originally from Valdosta, Georgia, and she's got an earned master's degree in professional counseling from Richmont Graduate University in Atlanta. And she, after graduating, she and her husband moved to Denver, Colorado for 4 years. And she built a private practice while also doing inpatient work with an agency. In 2014, they moved back to Savannah, Georgia, and she started Water's Edge Counseling. And she's married and has 2 beautiful girls, ages 5 and 1. And so, Whitney, tell us a little bit more about your private practice journey.
Yes. Well, it is a journey, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, it feels like every day there's something new to learn, just personally and as a therapist, but also as a business owner. It's just a new game here, but I love it. I love the adventure of it. When I got here to Savannah, sometimes it feels like you're starting over if you have to move from one city, especially if you have a practice in one place and then you're moving to another place where no one knows your name. Mm-hmm. So I kind of looked at different jobs, tried to work at a hospital, tried to work at a couple of private practices in town, and nothing was panning out for me. Fortunately, I made a connection through someone from graduate school, and this other gentleman was like, "Hey, I'm working for somewhere, but I'm wanting to go on my own too. Let's rent some space and make this happen." And so we did. So I kind of just jumped all in, and so glad I did. So I've been here in Savannah for, I guess it's 3.5 years now with the private practice. I did it by myself for a while, and then just this past January, hired my first clinician as a contractor.
Wow.
Hired my second one in March. So it's growing. Yeah.
Yeah. So how did you make that decision to start adding other clinicians to your practice?
It kind of just happened. My practice was growing. Let's see, not this past fall, but the previous spring. So a year ago was the first time I got to the point where I had too many clients that I couldn't see them. And I was starting to refer to other people in town. And then the summer came, and there was a little bit of a lull, but still had a good group coming in. But then when the fall came, I didn't have any slots available. And so that was when I started thinking about, okay, how can I continue to grow the practice and spread the word as far as good mental health care in this community? Well, that meant hiring somebody to work with me. So that was when I decided to go ahead and move forward.
Wow. Yeah. So, and I think that's very typical of a lot of us. When we get to that full place, we really want to be able to benefit from the referrals that maybe we could miss out of if we had to refer out. And I think that was very much my own journey as well, is that once I got my own practice full, I really wanted to have people that I trusted that I could refer to, number one, but also just knowing that giving them an opportunity to build a practice and start a private practice themselves in the context of a group.
At least in the state of Georgia, you have to be under somebody when you aren't licensed yet. So that was something that had happened to me when I was in Colorado. A dear friend became also a supervisor to me, and so I was able to kind of practice under her name in Colorado. So when I came here and got my license, it was something I wanted to offer as well.
Right.
One of the clinicians that's working for me is working towards her license.
Yeah. And that's, and again, just kind of the parallel thing. That's how I got started with adding people to my practice as well. Had people that I was supervising, and they were needing more hours for their client contact hours. And I had people I could refer to them. So that was just kind of a win-win all the way around with those. Yeah. So you've had the unique privilege of starting practices in different locations. And what have you learned about doing that you would maybe want to share with others in terms of if you were to go back and do it all over again, so to speak, what would be some of the mistakes you learned from? But you might not have made any mistakes.
No, definitely made mistakes. My practice in Denver was a little bit different in the fact that I was also working. I actually was doing inpatient work at a hospital there. So I wasn't able to commit as much time to the private practice. So my practice really wasn't as big as the one here. So a big part of it is just being committed to whatever kind of work you choose to do. And sometimes it is going to be starting a practice and working somewhere else. But as soon as you can get out there and really commit to the practice and market more and write more, I think your clientele will grow faster. I wasn't able to do much marketing because I was working.
Yeah, that and that's I guess one of the things to really kind of think about when a person starts a practice is how they're going to be able to devote the time to that whole marketing piece, which is so crucial in those beginning stages.
I think a lot of us hang our shingle and expect clients to just come, right?
Right.
And I think there is an element of that does happen. I mean, people will drive by my office. I'm in a really great location here in Savannah at a major intersection. So people will drive by and see the sign and look me up and call. But a lot of times it's getting out there and telling people about yourself and what you do. And that's kind of how the clients come. And so here in Savannah, because I've only been doing my private practice, I'm able to really get out there and meet with people and kind of make a lot of contacts.
Right. What have you found that has worked the best for you?
Yes. One of the great things is going to offices and meeting with people. People's work days are so busy, especially like doctor's offices or local churches and hospitals. So sometimes I'll take lunch to a doctor's office. One time I did a presentation on appropriate referrals, how to assess in a 15-minute slot when they see a client or a patient that comes in, being able to assess for mental health and provide an appropriate level of care, either inpatient or a day treatment program or an outpatient therapist. I also will always follow up with every referral. So like one of my referrals was from a social worker at the local inpatient hospital, but it was someone I had never met before. So I got the release signed and I called her and I said, hey, can I come bring cookies and hear about what you do? And I'll hand you some cards and we'll kind of move forward from there. So they were really grateful to make a contact because a lot of these people want to meet therapists face to face, but they're so busy, they don't have time. But if you can just pop in there for 10 minutes with a gift, it goes a long way.
Right. It's really, marketing is just nothing more than just developing relationships with people.
Yes, and we all love that. As therapists, we thrive in relationships. Right. So being able to think of it not as I'm marketing myself or someone has to come see me. It's just having a friendship with somebody, getting to know them, and just being available when they need somebody to call. Right.
So in starting those conversations with people that you're contacting and making those contacts with, how would you do it so that it didn't feel so salesy? I think that's one thing that a lot of people worry about is going in to have like you said a minute ago, going in and having a conversation with people and it not feeling like, okay, come call me or buy now or have I got a deal for you kind of thing. What did you find that helped you kind of start the conversation and get things going with people?
Yeah, I like to ask people, what are you doing? Like, how are you serving the people that come to you? And kind of hearing their story, maybe how they started their group. Like if it's like a pediatric office, hey, how did this pediatric office start? And what kinds of issues come in mental health? What are the things that you find challenging? And actually some of the doctors, which is how I kind of came up with the whole spiel on what to do in 15 minutes, is that was one of their issues that they were running into is parents coming in with their children and wanting to talk about these concerns, and they didn't feel like they knew how to address those in a short amount of time. So I took the problem that they introduced to me and then presented it back to them in a way that was helpful. So just asking them what their needs are and then being able to answer those needs.
Right. Yeah, and I would think that going into an area like Savannah, I'm not real familiar with it, but I know that it's a fairly large area, and there's probably a lot of other counselors there.
Yeah, Savannah is an interesting place. It has that big city feel, but also small town feel. Like you have to know somebody to get somewhere. So it's all about connections, which I really enjoy. I felt like when I was in Atlanta working, it was so hard to meet with someone to have a cup of coffee. People were too busy, but here people take the time to sit down and talk to each other. So it has made it easy in the connection piece. So,
what other marketing tips would you give folks in terms of just getting started and you've grown your practice pretty quickly. I mean, just within, 3.5 years, you said, it's really taken off. What were some other things that you found that really just kind of helped boost
the relationship component was a big part of it. And then I also am doing some online stuff. I had somebody look at my website and kind of redesign it. That has helped a lot. He did that back in the fall. And since then, about half of people go online and see the website and call because they said they Googled and the website looked great. I'm also close to the Savannah College of Art and Design. It's also called SCAD. So I do get a lot of clients through their counseling center. So I made a good connection over there. And their counseling center is really interesting. The more work you do with their clients and the better work you do, you get stars by your name in their referral system. And so then more people are calling you. So if you just do good work with their students, you get more clients.
Right.
So that's been another big place of referrals. And as simple as this is, Psychology Today.
Yeah.
And we get a lot through them. And then each of the clinicians, the contractors that are under me, they're also making their own Psychology Today profiles, and then they'll get calls through that.
One of the things that I think people really need to look at when they're getting started, psychology today has absolutely been one of the best returns on investment for my own practice as well. And I think there's a lot of other directories to maybe look into. When you made the decision to get onto psychology today, how was it you came to that decision? Because that for somebody just starting out, that might seem, paying $30 a month. For some that they might shy away from that.
Yeah, I'm not really sure why I picked that one. Maybe someone had told me about it. Maybe it seemed like a quick and easy way to get my name out there at the time. That I started that when I was in Colorado. But $30 a month, one session will cover that easily. So you can always cancel your subscription. In fact, I've had to cancel multiple times when I've had my babies. So then when I would have one, I would cancel because I wouldn't want to take new clients for a good 6 or 9 months, and then I would get back on. And it's a pretty easy process. So if you ever feel like your return on investment's not high enough, you can always get out of it.
Right. But you're exactly right. I think that's the way you have to think about it, is being able to think about it in terms of your ROI and being able to think if it just gets you one client, it pays for itself. Are there any other directories that you've been that you've used that you found helpful? I know you said you did a big revamp on your website. Can you tell us a little bit about what some of those revamps were and how that helped?
A big part of it was just making it look nicer. I had first created my own WordPress website, and it was so basic. I did get some people through the website, but not nearly what I'm getting now. I have the gift of the SCAD school right here, and so I have a lot of talented students and master's program students that are available. So I ended up hiring out someone who had graduated with their master's in graphic design, and so he manages the website for me. And anytime I need updates, I just reach out to him and he'll update it. But it's really important that my website looks good, since I do see about half students from SCAD, they're always looking at my website and commenting on it.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Yeah. And it's great. It's great to have a referral source like that. What do you remember about the changes that they suggested that you make?
Well, some of it was just design, making it more user-friendly, where you could click on certain things to get to a page on SCAD students or get to a page on adolescents. He added slideshows, things like that. These were just basic things that I didn't know how to add. But I really am big on do what you do well and hire somebody else to do the rest, if you can get to that point. So, I mean, once I was getting to the point where I was growing in clients, I was like, why am I spending 2 hours figuring out how to add one thing to my website, reading all these tutorials? And when this person came along, I was like, here, take my website away from me and make it look good. And he did.
Yeah. And that is an important piece, just knowing when to kind of switch from that bootstrapping kind of way of thinking about things to the, learning to outsource. I know that's been a tough one for me, even in my own practice, because I enjoy the bootstrapping part of it. I mean, I just have fun with the website stuff and that sort of thing. But when if I'm spending time on that stuff doesn't necessarily pay me directly. There is a return on the time, but if I can see more clients during the time I'm spending on, trying to figure out the different glitches in a website or anything else I'm working on, it's usually the money and the time is better spent by outsourcing.
Yeah, but you're also a little more tech savvy than I am.
Well, I don't know about that, but I've learned a lot just by teaching myself. But yeah, so one of the things that for Whitney and I that we've got in common is that we did get involved with a mastermind group, and Whitney, you want to talk a little bit about how that has impacted your practice and what the difference that has made for you and getting involved
I love
in
sharing
that?
my story on this because it's been just amazing. So I'm really excited about mastermind groups. I think that it's so helpful for anyone, even in the line of counseling, but even other fields. It's very helpful. I decided back in the fall when I was kind of waffling about adding clinicians, the idea of a mastermind came up, and I went back and forth on it because it is definitely a financial commitment that I had to make. And I was worried about the return on investment on that. But now that I've been doing it for,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, 6 months now, it has doubled my income from what I was making. Yeah. And I just needed
Wow.
that accountability with other people. Our field can get kind of lonely sometimes. And so that has really helped having someone to go to with my many questions about how does contract work happen and what is this HIPAA situation and what phone system should I use? So many questions are all answered either by the other people in the group or by the person that's leading the group. So having that confidence in myself coming from them and me growing personally has meant so much. So I highly encourage anyone to join a mastermind group.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's the thing that I notice is that when you've got peers, people that are doing essentially the same thing that you are, as you said, you're exactly correct. I think it helps boost that confidence in that you see that they're able to do these things that you're thinking about, and then just learn from them how they do those things, whether it be hiring a virtual assistant or thinking about adding new therapists. It's just having those conversations. Also, I think what the other thing that that's been a big benefit for me in the mastermind group is having people ask you the hard questions. Yeah. So what have been some of the big things that you've learned from your mastermind experience?
Yes. Well, a big one was, how do I actually grow? How do I go from 1 to 2 to 3? They're always asking me, what's the next thing you're working on? So I can't just sit by idly and just see my clients and walk out and be done. Like, I'm always thinking about, how do I want to grow? How do I want to serve the community? So that's always a big question coming up in group. Also through the mastermind, and I don't know, Gordon, if you're going to do yours the same way, but we have accountability partners. So those are people that I'm talking to a little more regularly, or one other person. And that has been really cool to really get to know someone else's practice in a really detailed way, and being able to kind of spur each other on in our growth has been really neat.
Uh-huh. Yeah, that is the plan for the mastermind group I'm getting started, is to very much model it under that same idea, and that you have people that you're accountable to. But accountable. Excuse me. The word accountable just doesn't seem to fit quite as well. But I think just more an encourager as much as anything. And there's something powerful about, I think where the accountability comes in is if you say you're going to do something, or you set a goal for yourself, when you say it out loud to somebody else, it just takes on a whole new different dimension.
Yeah.
In many
it kind
ways.
of gave me that kick in the butt I needed to grow, really.
Well, that's good. I'm glad to hear that you've had the same experience, and I really hope that we can get more people that are in private practice involved in mastermind groups in different ways, because I think it just, you're exactly right. As you said, it can get lonely. And I think, a lot of times we don't see stuff until we have other eyes on it. And I think the mastermind group allows you to do that. When you just present a problem to the group, or present a dilemma you're having with your practice, or decision you're trying to make, you can put it out there. And it's almost like every time people will say, well, why don't you try this? And it's kind of like, I hadn't even thought of that, so it really is very empowering to be involved in these things.
like yourself
Yep.
and other people I've been able to meet through the mastermind and hear about how they're doing, not just seeing clients in their practice, but they're doing even more than that. Speaking things or different initiatives that they're doing. It is really eye-opening and really challenges me to think beyond sitting in the chair. What are things that I can do in the world around me?
Right. Right. And the thing that, the other thing that you mentioned, Whitney, was just people, it shouldn't be surprising, but, what is really just kind of heartwarming for me is the people that I've been involved with have been just had this deeper sense of service to their community, and that they're going after what they want to do in the world in a very genuine way. And that has just been just very, I guess, for lack of a better way to put it, very uplifting and just feels very positive. Yeah. Yeah. Well, one other thing before we wrap up, I know one of the things that you and I talked about is that we had in common is that we both both of our practices are not necessarily faith-based, but we approach it from a faith-informed kind of perspective. Do you want to talk a little bit about that and just kind of how that works for you in your practice?
So I did attend a graduate school that was faith-based. There was a good integration with kind of Christianity, but also with the clinical skills. So that's always been a foundation for me when I enter into the room with clients and a big part of my practice. For each client that comes in, I kind of give them some space and say, can you tell me a little bit about your spiritual background? Do you have a spiritual background? Is this something that's important to you? Some clients flat out say no, and that is totally fine. A lot of clients will say, that's something that I've thought about, but I don't really know much about it, or I don't know what I think about it, or I've been hurt by the church or other faith groups. And so I just say, would you be comfortable if we talk about that sometime? And most of them actually are pretty happy that someone is talking about that and giving them that space that they need to talk about it. And so that'll come up later in sessions. Or some people find faith to be a very important part of their counseling, and they bring that up in the first session. And I say, okay, we'll integrate that into your counseling, but I'm also going to use these clinical skills as well.
Right. Right. And that sounds very similar to what I do. One of the things that I learned about Whitney and getting to meet her husband is a Methodist minister. And I've shared with others on the podcast that I have, I'm a clergy person in the Episcopal Church. And so we talked a lot about just how you integrate that, but at the same time, maintain those ethical boundaries and those ethical standards with our practice. And what I find is that if you just share with people that is part of your background, if it is important to them, it will always come up later. And so that's something that I've learned along the way. And two, I think it depends on the demographics of where you are. I know I always joke and say where I'm located here in East Tennessee is we're at the belt buckle of the Bible Belt. And one of the things about that is that there are, in many ways, it kind of creates a kind of a sub niche, in that people that are will seek out counselors and therapists that they know have a faith background, and that is something that's important to them. But I do think you, as you mentioned, Whitney, is just kind of having that balance there and being able to be very mindful and respectful of other people's views, and also what their past experience has been with church or religious organizations, and that some people have been very much wounded by those, and just being able to be maybe a different voice for that in their
Another
life.
important thing is, as we're holistic people, spirituality and faith is a part of who we are, regardless if we're saying it or not. So as clients kind of sit with me, in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, where are they spiritually? And how do they view God, or how do they view the universe, and how is that impacting the way they're speaking with me right now, and kind of bringing that to the forefront because it's there.
Right. Well, this is great stuff. And what I hope to do, Whitney, is, and you and I talked about this when we were up in Michigan, and it's maybe doing a series of podcasts just around counselors integrating faith-based stuff with their practices, because I think there are a lot of folks out there that would like to be able to do that, but also do it in a very ethical way. So we'll get you back on the podcast when we start doing that. Yeah. So what sort of parting thoughts would you want to leave with folks when you about private practice and what you've learned along the way in your journey?
Private practice is not for the weak, but it's totally worth it in the end. And you're going to have a lot of ups and downs. And you just kind of got to stay the course, do something that makes you happy, do the work that you're passionate about. For me, that's working with teenagers, working with adults, and letting that be a focus of what I do. It's also about bringing on other clinicians that think similarly to me, that I can trust, and seeing the work they're doing. So even when a glitch occurs, I just had something even last week come up that I was like, oh no, someone quit on me. But even when that happens, knowing that I'm just going to stay the course and something's going to work out and the practice is going to keep going the direction that I hope it'll go. So just don't give up.
Right. And that is so true. The people that succeed are what I like to refer to as persistent and consistent with what they do. And I think that's very much, we have that in common. Well, thanks, Whitney. I'm so glad you joined us today, and we'll hope to get you here again.
Would love to
in
Thanks,
the future.
Gordon. You too.
Okay, take care. So being persistent and consistent, as I like to call it, I think that is really what Whitney has been able to do in building her practice quickly after moving back to Savannah, Georgia from Colorado. She is just really a delight to get to know, and I'm so glad she joined me today on the podcast. So I'm glad you joined me as well. Those of you that are listening to the podcast, as I mentioned at the beginning, if you're enjoying the podcast, please go over and subscribe wherever you might be listening to the podcast, especially on iTunes or Stitcher or Google Play, or, even now on Spotify. You can get the podcast on Spotify if you didn't know that. So the podcast is showing up everywhere. And so I've tried to get it out there to any place that people might be listening. But do go over and subscribe to the podcast, and also give us a rating. That just helps boost us, and as far as being able to find people that can find us to be able to listen to the podcast. And also, as I mentioned at the beginning, if you're interested in joining a mastermind group, and as you heard from Whitney, it's really a game changer for a lot of people, go over to practiceoftherapy.com/mastermind, and you can find out more about how to join the mastermind groups that I'm starting and hope to keep going throughout the year. So glad you've joined me, folks, and thanks again for joining me on the Practice of Therapy podcast. And I hope that wherever you are and whatever you're doing, that your journey is a good one. Take care, folks. You have been listening to the Practice of Therapy podcast with Gordon Brewer. Please visit us at practiceoftherapy.com for more information, resources, and tools to help you in starting, building, and growing your private practice. If you haven't already, please sign up to receive the free private practice startup guide at practiceoftherapy.com. The information in this podcast is intended to be accurate and authoritative concerning the subject matter covered. It is given with the understanding that neither the host guests or producers are rendering legal, accounting, or clinical advice. If you need a professional, you should find the right person for that.